The next talk of the session is going to be on private attacks in longest chain proof of stake protocols with single secret leader elections. It's going to be given by Sarah Azouvi from Protocol Labs, and it is a joint work with Daniele Cappelletti from Politecnico of Torino. The floor is yours, Sarah.
Thank you for the intro, Fatini. Okay, let me start by presenting our framework. So as the title suggests, we are considering a proof of stake system. I'm sure everyone knows that proof of stake is a more efficient alternative to proof of work, where miners are elected to create blocks based on their stake and not based on their computational power as proof of work. In our work, we will consider a longest chain fork choice rule, which is quite typical in proof of stake system. It means that when there are two forks, miners will choose the fork with the most block. So in a proof of stake system, as I've already said, miners are elected randomly, proportional to their stake. So to start with, what we are going to consider is that we have access to an ideal random beacon. So what it means is that at each round, there will be a number Ri that is going to be created that is perfectly random. And then what's going to happen in the proof of stake system is that this random beacon is going to be given as input to a leader election function that's going to choose so randomly one of the miner in the system. So for example, in that case, Alice, and then Alice will be able to create the block on top of the longest chain. So most leader election protocol, they are probabilistic. So what it means is that very often they will elect one leader, Alice, but from time to time, it could happen that more than one leader is elected. So it could be Alice and Bob that are elected in the same round. Also, what could happen is that no one is elected leader in some round. So on expectation, there is going to be one leader elected, but in practice, depending on the round, there could be more than one or even zero. We see that this is quite problematic because this creates an opportunity for forks, right? If we have two leaders that are elected in the same round, then this creates a fork, and for obvious security reasons, this is not very desirable. So motivated by this, there is a new cryptographic primitive that have been presented recently and that is being actively researched actually at the moment. And it's called single secret leader election, or SSLE. And this is in opposition to probabilistic leader election, or PLE, that I've just mentioned before. So this crypto primitive is really cool because there will be exactly one leader that is elected per round. So it means that if we assume a synchronous model and just only honest participants, then there will be like no fork. There will be no natural fork. So that's pretty cool. And intuitively, we see that if there are no forks, the system, like no natural fork, the system should be more secure than if we were using the probabilistic leader election. I think that's quite a good intuition. Now, the question that we want to answer in our paper is, what is the actual security gain? And especially, we really want to quantify this for protocol designers and implementers. Is it worth using an SSLE scheme in your proof of stake blockchain? Because probably it's going to be a bit more complex to implement, maybe more overhead. So we are interested in computing this gain and quantifying this gain to help protocol designer make this choice. Before I move on, let me quickly mention another type of leader election that I haven't mentioned up until now. It's the one that is used in Ouroboros. It's based on a multi-party coin tossing protocol. And it also has the good point of being a single leader election, meaning that there's only one leader that is elected. But however, it's not secret, it's public. And having a protocol that is secret is very, very desirable in proof of stake system because it prevents some time of DDoS attacks. So that's why I haven't mentioned it for now. And in the rest of the talk, I will really focus on comparing the SSLE secret leader election versus PLE probabilistic leader election. So as the name of the talk and the paper suggests, in our analysis, we only focus on private attacks. So let me explain what a private attack is. It's really the most basic attack you could think of in any blockchain system. What's going to happen is the adversary is going to fork the chain and create a chain that is going to keep private for itself. So it's going to create block and not broadcast it to the rest of the player. And similarly, the adversary is not going to contribute block to the honest chain. So really what we have is two chains that are created in parallel. One of the honest player and the other one of the adversary that he keeps private to itself. So if the adversary has a fraction alpha of the total power, so of the total stake, then we can kind of say that the adversarial chain grows with a rate of alpha versus the honest chain that grows with a rate of 1 minus alpha. So it's clear that if alpha is less than 1/2, this attack will not be successful after some time. Oh, sorry, I forgot to say that the attack is successful only if the adversary managed to create a chain that is longer than the honest chain. So again, if the adversary has less power than the honest chain, this will become very, very unlikely as time passes. And what we are interested in our analysis is really computing these parameters that's going to tell us after how long the private attack becomes very unlikely to succeed. So you may be thinking that, oh, private attack is very, simple attack, it's very restrictive. And it's true that it is a restriction. We are not considering a general adversary. And there are two reasons that motivated us to make this choice. The first one is a paper called Everything is a Race and Nakamoto Always Wins, that basically prove that private attacks are the worst type of attacks in longest chain blockchains, in the sense that private attacks are the only one that appears in the security analysis of longest chain blockchain. So this motivated us to make this choice. And another reason why we only consider private attacks is that any analysis that consider a general adversary only provide some loose bounds in terms of security. There doesn't exist any closed form solution to capture the security. We actually had a talk about this in the previous session, but about proof of work. But in proof of stake, the analysis is the same. And in our case, we want to compare two different protocols, right? SSLE and PLE. And if we only have bounds on the security of each, then it's not possible to compare the two because one bounds could be smaller than the other, but then we don't know how far the actual security is from the bounds. So that wouldn't be useful. So that's why we limit ourselves to this adversary. Okay. So now let me present the security model. So we're gonna consider the persistent parameter, which is also sometimes called the finality parameter or the confirmation time, which really captures how long one needs to wait in order to have a transaction that is confirmed. So it is parameterized by epsilon, where epsilon is the probability that an adversary will win the private attack for some chain longer than k. So basically what this says, if we wait for k blocks, then the probability that the adversary succeed in doing the private attack is less than epsilon. So we're going to choose this epsilon to be quite small. And we are interested in comparing for a fixed epsilon, so a small epsilon, what is k in the SSLE case and the PLE case. So how long do we need to wait in both cases to be sure that our transaction is not going to be reversed? Okay, so now let me get to the actual analysis. So inspired by other protocol, we consider other papers, other analysis. We consider the gap of the protocol, which is defined as in my slide, which is the length of the adversarial chain minus the length of the honest chain. It is straightforward to see that the adversary will win the private attack if and only if the gap is strictly positive. Also, it should be quite straightforward to see that the gap is a random walk. So in the SSLE case, there is only one person that is elected leader at each round. So it's either an adversary, in which case the gap increases by 1, or it's an honest player, in which case the gap decreases by 1. That should be easy to see. In the PLE case, so probabilistic leader election case, this is quite similar, except that there could be some round where no one is elected, or where there are, both adversarial and honest players that are elected. So in this case, it's also a random walk, but the random walk could stay constant in some rounds. But that's really how the analysis works, is by studying these two random walks. So just as a warm-up, we can start by computing the expectation of these two random walks. And a first interesting thing that we see is that they are linear in n. So it's intuitively, so if we consider alpha that is less than a half, we see that the gap over time is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, which makes sense because it means that the adversary is going to be further and further away from winning the attacks, because the attack succeeds only if the gap is above 0. So what we see in the graph in my slide is that for the SSLE case, the coefficient is smaller than in the PLE case, which confirms our intuition that indeed SSLE is more secure than PLE, because the smaller the gap is, the more secure the protocol is. It means that the adversary is further away from the honest chain, basically. I'm not going to go into the details of the proofs, obviously, but just to give you some results. This graph represents the persistent parameters for different epsilon, so for different probabilities in the SSLE and PLE case. So it may look from the graph as if the curves are quite close to each other, but actually I will draw your attention to the fact that this is a logarithmic scale. So actually, even if the slopes look close, the difference are quite important. So for example, if we consider a probability of succeeding the attack of 10 to the minus 12, which is quite small, we can decrease the confirmation time from 550 to 400. And if we consider, like, this is for 33% adversary, and for different adversary, for example, the 10% adversary, we can decrease the confirmation time by 32%, or for a 49% adversary by 17%. So really, when we find this result, we were quite happy. Like, we found that it's actually a very good gain in security. However, there's one limitation in the analysis that I've just showed to you, is that we considered an ideal random beacon, which doesn't actually exist. Most of the proof-of-stake protocols that exist, they use an internal random beacon. So what it means is that the random beacon is updated by every leader in their block. So for example, let's say that in the previous block, the random beacon was Ri minus 1. Then in order to update the random beacon, what's going to happen is that the leader in the next round will use a deterministic signature or a VRF, if you are familiar with this, on the previous random beacon, maybe XORed with the round number. That's just like to illustrate this. But one problem with this, one very known problem, is the problem of grinding. So what is the problem of grinding? Let's assume that we are in the PLE case and that the adversary controls 2 players that are elected leader in the next round. So the adversary was lucky. Then the problem is that these 2 players, they're going to create 2 different random beacons, R1 and R2, because they're going to have 2 different secret key, right? So the signature is going to be different. And the adversary could choose between R1 and R2. And that's not only it, is the adversary could also decide to, not produce a block in this round, not use any of these leaders, and see what happens if it skips the block. It is going to create another R3 random beacon. So really, in that case, the adversary can choose between 3 different random beacons. And you see that if you repeat this attack over a long time period, this is really like exponential. This will be a tree of random beacons. So it's very like biasable. It's not random. That's very problematic. In the case of SSLE, obviously there will only be one leader that can be elected in a round. So the adversary is more limited in its grinding. The only options are available are either produce a block or not produce a block, which will create 2 different random beacons. So hopefully the attack is clear now. And now let me give you the results that we find in the case of grinding. So the first question that we asked is, what is the security threshold in this case? In the previous case where we had the ideal random beacon, it was obvious that the security threshold was 1/2. So what it means is that for an adversary that has less than half of the power, the attack will never succeed at some point. But in this case, when there is grinding, the adversary can gain an unfair advantages. So what is the actual power that we can give to the adversary in order to have a secure protocol? So we found that the security threshold is actually lowered from 0.36 to 0.26 when considering SSLE versus PLE. Sorry, SSLE is the one with the higher security threshold. So we can tolerate a much stronger adversary if you use SSLE. We can tolerate an adversary that has up to 36% of the power. Whereas in the PLE case, so the basic case, we can only tolerate an adversary with 26% of the power. So again, we see that this is a big difference. Now, very quickly, we can draw the same graph as we had before that give the persistence parameter, so the confirmation time that we need to wait in the SSLE versus PLE case. In that case, we found that the difference between the two is even bigger than before. There is a 70% decrease in confirmation time for 10% adversary, or 80% decrease with a 20% adversary. So really very, very promising results. And yeah, I haven't detailed the proof, that wouldn't make sense for the talk, but the paper is online, so you can find all the details online. So let me conclude, because I think we are out of time anyway. So we found in this paper that SSLE improves the security of proof-of-stake longest chain protocol significantly. And so this should be useful for protocol designers, so they can see what are the trade-offs when using PLE versus SSLE. This work has some limitation that maybe could be interesting to consider for future work. So we consider a synchronous model, so it would be interesting to consider an asynchronous model. And also we limited our adversary to private attacks, and it will be interesting to consider a more general adversary. There is a link to the paper on arXiv. Please go and check the proof. And I'm happy to take some questions if there is time. Or also you can email me or tweet at me if you want after the talk. I'm very happy to discuss it further.
Thank you so much, Sarah. There is already a question in Q&A, basically asking if any of the SSLE primitives that you mentioned, you quoted 2 papers, is ready for use in the practical protocol design, or are they only theoretical works?
That's a good question. As far as I know, right now, it's mostly theoretical work. I'm not sure there is some like POC or like implementation that are ready to use. So I think, and also it's an active area. Like I think there are new papers being proposed, like improvement being proposed. So I would say that it's still in the like research stage. I don't know of any implementation, at least, that exists.
So let me ask a question as well. There's like 1 minute left. So I was wondering, there are some proposals for secret leader election in the case of anonymous cryptocurrency. So the idea there is that if the stake is also hidden, how can we elect a leader? And as far as I know, so there are proposals that are closer to the Algorand kind of protocol. So there would be probabilistic, and there is one like the Ouroboros Krypsinos one, which is more, closely following the single leader election. So I was wondering whether your observations would also directly apply on those private protocols, or the fact that there is more hidden information there would make any difference.
That's a good question. Like my first answer would be, I think this should be the same even in the private case. I think so, but as long as it's longest chain. So for example, Algorand maybe isn't. So, but I think that I'll need to think more about it. But my intuition would be that we don't really use like any, like actually we don't even use the fact that it's a secret leader election. So we only use the fact that there is exactly one leader that is elected, whether we know it or no. Actually doesn't make a difference. So I think results should be similar, but to be investigated more. I'll have a look. Good points.
That's great. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you.
Let's move on to the last talk of the session by Duke.